This is not just the final chapter of The Conjuring. It is the moment where everything the Warrens believed in is tested one last time, stripped down to its rawest form. To understand why this story matters, we have to go back to where it truly began. Not with a haunted house, not with an exorcism, but with a birth that almost did not happen. The year is 1964. Inside a quiet antique shop, a young Lorraine Warren, heavily pregnant, feels an unexplainable pull toward a single object resting among forgotten relics. A mirror carved with three faces, staring outward as if waiting to be noticed. In classical demonology, the number three is never accidental. It is often used by malignant entities as a blasphemous distortion of the Holy Trinity, a symbol of fragmentation, false unity, and divided perception, a structure designed to confuse the mind before breaking the soul. When Lorraine touches the glass, her reflection smiles back at her, not as a reaction, not as a trick of the light, but as an independent act. This is not fear yet. This is recognition. The entity does not attack violently. It does not rush. It marks its target. Lorraine's labor begins almost immediately, brutal and unnatural, as if something unseen has triggered a countdown. As she is rushed to the hospital, the entity surrounds her, visible only to her eyes, lingering at the edge of her vision, waiting for the precise moment of maximum vulnerability. When the baby is delivered, there is silence. The doctors hesitate. The child is declared stillborn. In that moment, Ed and Lorraine are no longer investigators, no longer people of faith or reputation. They are simply parents watching everything collapse. They pray, not with confidence, but with desperation, and then the cry breaks the silence. The baby breathes. Life returns. This is not a miracle without consequence. It is an act of defiance. The demon failed to claim a soul that night, and it will never forget that failure. Judy is born marked, a living threshold between life and death, a presence the darkness will attempt to reclaim again and again across decades. As she grows, Lorraine teaches her the Lucy Locket rhyme, not as superstition, but as psychological armor, a grounding ritual, a way to anchor a child who sees things others cannot. But protection does not mean immunity. It only delays the inevitable. We move forward to 1986, to West Pittston, Pennsylvania, and to the Smurl family. An ordinary household living an ordinary life, unaware that their story is about to intersect with something ancient. Jack, Janet, the grandparents, and four daughters are not seeking danger. They are not experimenting with the occult. They simply receive a gift, an antique mirror, the same mirror. The film introduces a key concept here, one that defines the entire narrative. Evil is circular. Haunted objects carry spiritual gravity. They return. They attract. They orbit those with emotional intensity, psychic sensitivity, or unresolved pain. During Heather's birthday celebration, something snaps. A ceiling light crashes onto the table, cutting her head. This is the moment where everything shifts. The transition from infestation to oppression. Blood has been spilled, an involuntary sacrifice. The mirror is no longer dormant, it is awake. From here, the escalation becomes intimate. Children are targeted first. A doll moves on its own. A presence watches from corners. The creepy hag is not just a scare designed to shock. It is an archetype that appears across cultures and folklore, representing suffocation, paralysis, and the slow theft of personal agency. It feeds on fear that cannot escape. When Dawn vomits shards of glass after the family attempts to throw the mirror away, the film delivers one of its cruelest rules. You cannot simply discard evil. Once the bond is formed, the object is no longer the source. The connection has already moved inside the victims. Physical rejection only provokes deeper retaliation. At the same time, Ed and Lorraine attempt to step away from active investigations. Age and exhaustion are catching up. Ed's heart condition is not symbolic. It is strategic vulnerability. The entity understands erosion. It does not need to overpower him. It only needs to wait. During a dinner with an adult Judy, Lorraine notices something deeply unsettling. Judy whispers in tongues, glossolalia is not possession, it is leakage, a pressure valve releasing something that has never fully left. The connection is genetic, indissoluble. Judy has become the lightning rod for everything her parents have fought for years, whether she wants that role or not. The situation collapses completely with the arrival of Father Gordon. Until this point, the evil has remained contained within families and private spaces. But now the entity shifts its strategy. It no longer wants secrecy, it wants authority. It wants to demonstrate that even the structures meant to protect faith are vulnerable. Father Gordon does not enter the Smurl house as a warrior, but as a servant. His presence is quiet, hopeful, almost fragile. And that is precisely why the entity targets him. His forced suicide inside the Diocese of Scranton is not simply an act of violence. It is a ritualized desecration, a message delivered with surgical cruelty. There is no sacred ground left, no protected institution, no higher power standing between the demon and its prey. When Judy touches Father Gordon's casket and sees the truth of his death, something irreversible happens inside her. Fear gives way to clarity. She understands that running has never weakened the darkness. Avoidance has only allowed it to grow. For the first time, she accepts that her abilities are not a curse meant to isolate her, but a responsibility meant to protect others. Her decision to go alone to the Smurl house is not impulsive. It is intentional. It is the moment where inheritance becomes agency. When Ed and Lorraine arrive to retrieve her, Lorraine begins reading the energetic layers of the house. What she finds is not a simple haunting. She senses the spirits of a murdered woman and her mother, victims of domestic violence whose pain still echoes within the walls. But this is not the truth that matters most. Lorraine realizes that these souls are not the architects of the suffering. They are prisoners, trapped, exploited. The mirror entity has been using them as camouflage, hiding its ancient presence behind human trauma, manipulating grief to obscure its true form. In the attic, Judy is confronted with a vision designed to break her completely. Annabelle, grotesquely enlarged and distorted, towers over her like a childhood nightmare given physical mass. This is not random imagery. The film strongly suggests that the mirror functions as a catalyst, a central processor connecting every cursed object, every unresolved trauma, every residue of fear the Warrens have encountered throughout their lives. The mirror is not merely a portal between worlds. It is an archive, a memory vault of terror, storing emotional pain and feeding on recognition. The final confrontation fractures the family on every level. Lorraine is trapped in the basement, buried beneath layers of darkness and isolation. Judy is dragged toward the attic, compelled toward self-destruction, reenacting the same method the entity used on Father Gordon. The house itself rebels, behaving like a living organism under siege. Hallways distort, space bends, exits vanish, logic collapses. This is no longer a haunted house. It is a predatory environment. Tony Spera becomes essential in this moment, not because of training or faith, but because of presence. He represents something the entity does not fully understand. Love without ritual, protection without doctrine, the refusal to abandon someone even when fear demands retreat. His intervention breaks the physical sequence just long enough for the family to reunite. When they finally stand together before the mirror, the film abandons traditional exorcism language. Ed reads from the Bible, but the pages burn. Prayer alone is no longer sufficient. The victory comes through something far more dangerous to the demon. Revocation. When Judy screams, "You're not there," She is not denying existence. She is denying authority, fear, belief, consent. The entity collapses because it can no longer anchor itself to the perception of its victims. The mirror shatters. The scream dissolves into nothingness. The curse that began in 1964 finally ends. The epilogue shifts tone completely. Judy and Tony's wedding is not simply a happy ending. It is survival made visible. The presence of families once saved by the Warrens transforms the celebration into collective acknowledgement. Pain endured, lives reclaimed, the weight of decades finally lifting. Lorraine's final vision is quiet and restrained, not triumph, not glory, just continuity, age, peace, a future that does not need constant vigilance. Historically, Ed would pass away in 2006 and Lorraine in 2019, but the film leaves us with something stronger than dates. Love outlived the darkness. The Last Rites closes not as a story about evil, but as a meditation on legacy. The Smurls remained in their home for years afterward, claiming the ordeal strengthened their bond. The Warrens' public work ends here, not in defeat, but in completion. The mirror is gone, the fear has been named, and the light, fragile but real, remains. Because every light matters, especially the ones that refuse to go out.